Hi biologists, let's start by looking at the learning objectives for this lesson. At the end of this section and following the biology syllabus, you should be able to identify the factors that regulate plant growth. You should be able to define the terms Phototropism, Geotropism, Thigmatropism, Hydrotropism and Chemotropism. You should be able to understand the significance of Phototropism and Geotropism and be able to give examples. What does this actually mean? What are we trying to learn? Well, you have to be able to identify the things that control or regulate growth in plants. You have to be able to give the definition of the following terms: Phototropism, Geotropism, Thigmatropism, Hydrotropism and Chemotropism. And you have to understand the importance of Phototropism and Geotropism and be able to give examples of each. Plant responses. Plants are living things, so they show the characteristics of life or they respond to changes in the environment. Plant responses often involve growing or changes in growth. This type of response means that plants move, but their movement is much slower than that of animals. Today we want to look at growth regulation in plants. One of our objectives is to identify the factors or understand what affects plant growth. We can see here that plant growth is affected by two factors. Plant growth is regulated by 1. External factors and 2. Internal factors. What are external factors? Well, external factors are things to do with the environment outside the body of the plant. EX for exit and EX for external, outside. Internal factors are to do with inside, things within the body of the plant that affect growth. IN for inside and IN for internal. Now let's have a look at the external factors. The first factor that affects the growth of a plant is light intensity. The brightness of the day, if you like. Whether it is dark, shady, sunny, bright. We would have met this idea in ecology when we saw that light intensity affects where plants grow. The bluebells are shade-loving plants, so grew under the trees, whereas the buttercups are sun-loving plants and they grew out on the lawn. The length of the day is another external factor that affects plant growth. We can see this when the seasons change. The days are much longer in the summer and shorter in the winter. The plants are able to respond to this. Gravity. This refers to whether the plants will grow up or whether the plant parts will grow down. Gravity affects plant growth. And so too does temperature. The temperature of the soil and the temperature of the air. This is very evident in the winter when the grass in the lawn stops growing. This is because the air temperature and the soil temperature is far too cold. We need to keep an eye on these factors. We have met them already in the ecology video. Light intensity and temperature are abiotic factors. They are non-living factors in the environment that affect the growth of plants. What about internal factors? How do they affect plant growth? Well, internal factors are really growth regulators. Growth regulators regulate the growth of plants. In my day, they used to be called hormones. They are rather similar to hormones because they are chemicals made in apical meristems in a certain part of the plant, and they have an effect perhaps elsewhere. Apical meristems are the tippy top of the shoot and the tippy top of the root. They can also be called meristematic regions. So in a nutshell, the growth of plants is affected by two main factors, external factors and internal factors. The plants respond to external stimuli, changes in the environment, changes in temperature, changes in light intensity, changes in day length. When they respond to these stimuli, the response is carried out by their growth regulators. And as a result of the action of the growth regulators, the plants will grow. The growth responses are called tropisms. What are tropisms? A tropism is a growth response of a plant to an external stimulus. The growth response will invariably involve movement, which of course will be much slower than the movement of animals, and the response is evidence of the fact that plants are living organisms and showing a characteristic of life. Now they will respond to external stimuli or things in the environment. For those of you able for a bit more, a positive tropism is growth towards the stimulus in the direction of what's changing in the environment. So for example, the stem will grow towards light. This is a positive reaction. It is a positive phototropism, if you like, in favour of the stimulus. A negative tropism then obviously is growth away from the stimulus. You can see there, N for negative, and if you are negative, you're usually against something or your answer is no. N for no, N for negative. An example of a negative tropism is the way that stems grow away from gravity. They grow up. Now, here comes the bad news. There are different types of tropisms, and you have to know the definition of each type. Now, if we have a look at them, there is a simple trick we can use to help us remember. When we look at the word phototropism, we can see the word tropism in there. You might recall a second ago that a tropism is the growth response of a plant to an external stimulus. So, what tropism are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about phototropism, which means light. So this is a growth response of a plant to light. Geotropism, same idea again. It is a growth response, but in response to what? You might be forgiven for thinking in response to geography, but in actual fact, it's in response to gravity. Thigmatropism is the growth response of a plant to touch. Hydrotropism, have a look at it. There's the word hydro. What do you think that is a growth response to? Well, hydrotropism is the growth response of a plant to water. You guessed it. Remember hydroelectric plants in geography. Chemotropism is a growth response of a plant in response to, you guessed it, chemicals. Now what we're going to do next is we're going to take each one of these tropisms, look at the definition and give an example. So the first one on the list is phototropism. Well, as we've just said, we have to learn the definition of phototropism. So, looking at the word again, phototropism. It is the growth response of a plant to light. Remember, photo is light. This light is usually unidirectional. This means it's light coming from one direction. Story of my life. The sun generally would be shining on one side of the plant. So this is what we mean by unidirectional light. Now, a positive phototropism, remember, in favour of the stimulus or towards the stimulus, would be where stems grow towards light. A negative phototropism, you're against it. No, it's away from the stimulus. So an example would be where roots grow away from light. What about geotropism? Again, we have to learn the definition. So, geotropism is the growth response of a plant to gravity. Positive geotropism would be where roots grow towards gravity. Positive, in favour of the stimulus or towards the stimulus. Negative geotropism, against the stimulus. No. The example of negative geotropism would be where stems grow away from gravity. Thigmatropism is the growth response of a plant to touch. T for touch, T for thigmatropism. Thigma is the Greek or Latin word for touch. Positive thigmatropism would be where tendrils belonging to pea plants, perhaps, you've heard of a tendril of hair, perhaps, they send out these hair-like structures which allow them to grow around objects and hang on to sticks or stems to get towards the light. Negative thigmatropism is where roots grow away from objects. Now this is rather interesting because it allows roots to grow into areas of least resistance. When the roots are growing towards the ground, they want to avoid growing into objects and getting damaged, perhaps hitting off stones. So by showing negative thigmatropism, the roots will grow away from the stones and grow into the soil areas, which are the areas of least resistance. Hydrotropism. What is the definition? Well, hydrotropism is the growth response of a plant to water. Hydro is the Greek or Latin word to do with water. Positive hydrotropism is where roots grow towards water. You also have the idea here that the root cap senses the water. Negative hydrotropism is where stems grow away from the water. Lastly, chemotropism. Remember the definition? It is a growth response of plants to chemicals. Chemochemicals. Positive chemotropism is where roots would grow towards fertilizers. These fertilizers are usually minerals. We also have an example of positive chemotropism where the pollen grain in reproduction grows towards the ovule. Negative chemotropism is where roots grow away perhaps from harmful chemicals or heavy metals or harmful acids in the soil. Now, what is the significance of phototropism? In other words, we have to understand the importance of phototropism. Well, phototropism is important because stems grow towards light. As we've already said, they are positively phototropic. Because the stems grow towards light, this means that the leaves will face the sun. Now, if the leaves are facing the sun, this means they will then carry out more photosynthesis. And if leaves carry out more photosynthesis, they will produce more food and they will grow more. And this is why phototropism is so important. What is the significance of geotropism? another learning objective of this lesson. In other words, why is geotropism so important? Well, as we know, roots grow towards gravity. They grow down into the soil. They are positively geotropic. Because the roots grow down into the soil, then they will anchor the plant more efficiently. And if the plant is well anchored, they will be able to absorb more water and minerals. And this is why geotropism is so important. There you have it. Make sure you know these definitions off by heart. Practice them in a jotter until you have them word perfect. Now that we have reached the end of our lesson, have we achieved our objective? Can you identify the factors that regulate plant growth? Can you define the terms Phototropism, Geotropism, Thigmatropism, Hydrotropism and Chemotropism? And do you understand the significance of Phototropism and Geotropism, and are you able to give examples?